get your comments in there. But also, you can dial 347-237 347-237 5230. That's the number to call if you'd like to get your thoughts, insights, dialogue on the air on Blog Talk Radio. We're glad that you're tuning in with us today. We're going to have uh, great program lined up for you. I'm sorry, I'm doing too much at one time. It's glare, man. I tell you. Um, so we're going to be talking on the topic of preventing predators inside and outside of the church, faith communities. How can we prevent uh, predators in light of the airing of the documentary on Lifetime, R. Kelly? Now, I did not watch that, so I have no insight about that, and I'll talk about that a little bit more later on. Um, and so that's basically what we're going to be talking about. But a couple of the headlines that did catch my attention. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Pastor Chris Hill, who was pastor of the Potter's House Church in Colorado, a protege of Dr. Bishop T.D. Jakes. And recently, I think over the New Year weekend, he was detained in Atlanta Hartsfield Airport, and he presented a post stating that he was detained. He was uncertain as to why he was detained, and was asking for prayers and for his release and all of that. And it was later discovered, or he provided to his audience and followers information as to why he was detained. While he said he was uncertain, it was later determined that he was detained because he had not paid child support. So he owed back child support. He was leaving the country to a preaching engagement outside of the country. I think it was in South Africa. So he was leaving to go preach there, but was not allowed to leave the country because his passport had been flagged because he owed back child support. Uh, and the only reason I know about Pastor Chris Hill is because, again, he pastor of the Potter's House Church, protege of Bishop Jakes, and he had a scandal that came to light about 2 years ago. The scandal was he had an affair on his wife, and that's not uncommon for preachers, unfortunately. That's not uncommon. He had an affair on his wife, but the person he cheated with, I believe, was one of his spiritual daughters or mentors or something like that. So that was the scandal, and he ended up being released from the church, and now he's back in headlines again. Well, Christian headlines again for that particular reason. And he was soliciting prayers, and later had, I think, well, I know you can go to the old Black Church blog site, and Ms. Ann Brock, who's a wonderful blogger, and she provided this story, and he put up a video basically addressing his situation and spilling the tea on his, what led to all that happened to him leaving Potter's house. How he cheated on his wife because he claims that she was a wicked woman. I don't know the woman, but being married to a preacher might be wicked. I'm just kidding. No offense to preachers' wives or preachers' spouses. They're spices also. So he went on the tangent about the things leading to him and his situation. Now, I personally believe there's no excuse for back child support. I don't have any children, and I know a lot of brothers who, for various reasons, are unable to take care of that particular fiscal obligation. Some are incarcerated. Some don't have the means of, by way of employment. They don't make enough, and sometimes they have 2 or 3 children they have to pay child support on. So it's all crazy kind of things. But still, if you have the means, and in this case, it appears that he had the means, and maybe it was neglect. He had steady preaching engagements, and so he has the means, and it just appears to be neglect. So yes, I think you should pray for him in that sense. I think it was coming to Jesus moment for him, for accountability, and it should be a wake up moment for all clergy involved in situations like that. If we are going to be the clergy we are expected to be, then we need to be aware of all of our obligations. And I'm talking about myself, because that goes for credit, that goes for regular bills, all of that stuff. We have to be good stewards, and I have to be the first one to take accountability, because when it comes to paying some of my bills, if I did not have direct debit, if they weren't automatically drafted out, man, I'd be neglectful. That's just me. I forget, and I'm glad to have auto payment because those things come out. Sometimes they may put me in a financial bind, but I know I'm taking care of my obligations. So, but prior to that, I did have issues trying to make sure all of that was taken care of. And it's good to have a spouse who's able to take care of that, or not take care of it, but assist you in that. In that, but that's neither here nor there. Um, so I just thought that was interesting. I was reading in the Old Black Church, and that was the two top stories that came up right then. I'm soliciting your prayers on behalf of my family. My beloved grandmother passed away on Monday night. Um, Many of you who know me know that she raised me and my brothers after my mother was killed in an act of domestic violence that involved a gun in 1980. So nearly 40 years ago, she took us into her home, raised us as her children. For years I didn't know my aunts were actually, my aunts. I thought they were my sisters. And sometimes they treated us, and they still do. They treat us like, like little brothers, more so than and nieces. I mean nephews, not nieces. Oh God. So I there was a great loss when we lost her, having gained a wonderful person. We have been preparing for this for a number of weeks. Um, Let me tell you, that woman is so strong. That woman surpassed everybody's expectations of survival. She just fought, and even as her bodily abilities were limited and uh, uh, were coming to an end, her cognitive ability was still there. She was still trying to interact as best she could, and got to love a woman like that. She did well, and she is resting with the ancestors. So lift up our family. We'll be celebrating her life next week. And if you're in the Monroe, Louisiana area and you would like to come and join in our celebration, you're welcome to. It will be next Friday uh, in Monroe, Louisiana at the Riverside Missionary Baptist Church. So you're welcome to join us in celebrating her life. And I am soliciting in advance your prayers and thoughts, because this little kid will be giving the eulogy, and I can't think of a better way. Let me show you this. When I first told my grandmother I was called to preach, I think I may have been about 10 um, when I first can cognitively remember having that conversation with her. But I believe I didn't know believe, I already knew she knew, because uh, the saying is that my great grandparents, her parents, and I had the privilege of knowing them and living with, sharing time with them before they transitioned. And my maternal great grandparents all said that I would be a preacher when I was born and as a little child. So they all said that. And, when I acknowledged my call publicly at 12, and when I began public ministry, because I was doing a lot of preaching or speaking at 12, 13, and 14. But when I got my license to preach at 16, she was right there, right there. She looked good and she had the biggest smile on her face because, hey, I made her look good. But the proudest moment for me, not only was she at that first public sermon, she was also at my 25th anniversary celebration. Um, a few years ago, she and my grandfather and my brother, they traveled in the storm. They traveled in the storm from Louisiana to come to Jackson, Mississippi to be a part of that celebration with me. And that made the moment even more special. So, and thank you, Terrence. Bless you too, classmate. Um, that made the moment even more special. And spending time with her throughout she had Parkinson's disease. So I want to encourage those of you, if you want to support any type of organization, any type of um, movements or things of that nature. We support, my family supports breast cancer awareness, and we'll be supporting Parkinson's also because we've had loved ones and gun violence prevention, Parkinson's now, and breast cancer because we've had loved ones that we were directly impacted by those incidents. So I want to strongly encourage you to support things like that, agencies that are conducting research and things of that nature to bring greater awareness and also find a cure for these things. So that's my pen, my little promotion for that. So, and again, we soliciting your prayers and thank you for all your comments on our Facebook yesterday and texts and messages and everything. But the journey is just beginning for us. It's still a long way to go because she was the matriarch, she was the rock, she was Madea, literally. Now she wasn't Tyler Perry Madea. No, she was the church hat wearing Madea that would sit quietly in the church, and she didn't say anything in church. As long as I can remember, she'd sit there, but she'd be taking it all in. Every now and then she raised her hand, and she would be in service, but she was that one. She saw everything. And when she was a mother in the church, I feel bad for those kids because I'm quite sure as a mother she saw everything. But anyway, I digress. So be in prayer again. If you like to participate in the celebration of life that we're going to be having for her, that will be happening next Friday in Monroe, Louisiana. Okay, so let's get into the topic of the day. And I don't plan to do a long broadcast. The radio show usually lasts about an hour, so we may go, may not, because I'm doing this live format. We may, we may abridge it however we can. However, the conversation goes. If you guys get involved in the dialogue, then yes, we'll have a very fruitful, long conversation. But if I gotta do all the talking, it won't go long because I'll run out of fuel. Anyway, so how can we prevent predators inside and outside the Black faith community? And I bring this to light because, again, the documentary Surviving R. Kelly, I did not watch, but it's good to be on social media because there were enough people who watched for me to provide their own commentary on Mr. Kelly, the allegations, and anything else that was associated with that, all the parties and all of that. And I'm gonna tell you this: this is a very taboo subject in the Black community, in the extended Black community, as well as, and particularly, the Black church community, because we know now, because of the Roman Catholic Church and all the things that happened in the mid 2000s with the Roman Catholic Church here in the United States, we saw how big of an issue predatory or predators are in the church, or sexual exploitation of minors, women, and yes, even men in the church is. It happens more than we care to admit, and In many cases, there are no systems in place. There are no systems in place for churches where this happens. And in many cases, it is reactionary things that people do, that church leaders do, church administrators do, is reactionary, and it's good reactionary, where they then put in policies or procedures to protect those who are vulnerable. And our children are very vulnerable. And the black church, women are very vulnerable because they make up the majority of church population across the board, black and white. Um, and those vulnerable parties are more likely to be exploited by persons who are predators. And it took me a while to realize that some people who have predatory tendencies join the church, enter ministry, because they know that that is a place for them to find vulnerable persons. Think about that for a moment. That is a place for them to find vulnerable persons. Now, from all the commentary that I was reading regarding the R. Kelly documentary and the stories of how parents would bring their daughters to his concerts, and I ain't gonna lie, I love the man's music. I greatly admire his music. I've arranged his music for bands. I've I bought a couple of his positive CDs. I didn't buy Chocolate Factory. I didn't buy 12 Play. I didn't buy that. I think I do have one album CD that I bought, and can't remember the reason I bought it. I think it was, of course, it was on sale. But I can't recall exactly why I purchased it. While some may call him a musical genius in the realm of Michael Jackson and Prince, he is very talented, but that talent had with it apparently the pervasiveness to be a predator. And those parents were bringing their children, their daughters, to him with the hopes of him discovering them and leading their child to greater heights. And it's no different across the board. Yes, he was in the music arena, but think about this: that the coach at Michigan, who was the gymnast, was not the coach, the doctor, was a gymnast, was a trusted, respected doctor for all those gymnasts in the United States and across the world, I guess, and how he himself was a predator, and it took decades for many of those young ladies to come forth about how he exploited them sexually. And let me clarify when I use the terms exploit and predator. When I'm using these terms, I'm using terms both not necessarily in a negative sense, but predatory in the sense that these persons have predetermined their praxis. They have predetermined what they will do. They have predetermined who they will interact with, who they will try to interact with, who they will try to seduce. That's a predator. I'm not talking about a person, male or female, who has an inappropriate relationship because they may be attracted to attracted to that person, and that person may be underage, because there are cases like that, unfortunate, and it's nothing new. We've had this in the black community for generations. Older men would be attracted to a teenage girl and go to the family and say, I want your daughter. Then, so girls would be getting married as young as 14 and 15. And of course, there were some men, that was way people say that, hey, Pearl, thank you. Yes, she was the sweetest person, the sweetest spirit. But y'all didn't see when she whooped us. I'm just saying, Doris Jackson was sweet, 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 sweet. But when she was ready to whoop us, I don't know where that sweetness went. All that sweetness went out the door when she got that switch, that belt. Yeah. I should have called the peoples on her a couple of times. I'm lying. I'm lying. I never would have done that. But thank you, Pearl. Keep us in your prayer. Um, so when it comes to predators, these are persons who are intentional in becoming a part of an organization because they are aware of vulnerable persons who are in that organization, in that church, in whatever it may be, Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts, any kind of organization where they will have access to vulnerable population. They are predators. Okay, that's how I define a predator. So a predator is intentional. Um, and exploit. When I use the term exploit, I'm speaking in terms of knowing these persons who are predators, knowing that the person that they are intentionally preying upon will more than likely have their trust, and they're able to take advantage of that individual's trust. That is how I'm using the term exploit. In some ways, they will use manipulation. Sometimes it can be emotional manipulation. They will be able to tell, especially vulnerable children and teens. Here's the thing with teenagers: when teenagers are going through this moment of puberty and adolescence, they are highly vulnerable and highly susceptible to parties who will prey upon them and exploit them. That includes teachers, that includes ministers, that includes volunteers in local agencies or organizations or things that they are part of. And those persons who are predators are aware of this. Sometimes it may be not fully cognizant of how aware they are, but they are aware subconsciously. They understand that they have the ability to manipulate said individual, said vulnerable party. They have the ability to do that. In the Black church, unfortunately, because uh, within the constraints of the Black church, we all family. Yeah, we all family. We all brother and sister. And because we all family, I'm just another brother or sister. And that is a dangerous concept. And we must be careful in our readiness and our zeal to want to uh, embrace everyone. I guess you can say that, because not all embracing of individuals who want to work with a particular vulnerable party are worth it. Um, Everybody, and as a pastor, I've learned this, and because I worked in youth ministry and I worked in public education as a teacher and as a school administrator. Um, One thing I do know is that parents love the fact that persons are interested in their children. When I was a band director, um, and at one school I was teaching, um, I had a great relationship with the young boys in the band, and their parents loved the fact that I had a relationship with them. And I tell you, it got on my nerves because they're budding boys. It Yeah, it was just crazy. Um, but they trusted me enough to understand, that I had the best interest of that child at hand, and I wasn't trying to be a predator. I wasn't trying to manipulate them. If I'm picking up your son or your daughter, in that case, sometimes I picked up some daughters, some young ladies, but I'm doing it because I feel obligated as part of my role. If you can't, I don't mind dropping your kid off. If I don't mind, and I did quite a bit of that and I still, even in my role now as pastor, there, some children I've picked up from the home and dropped off at the home, and I do that with care. I do that with care, and caution. I do that with care and caution. But because parents want to have positive figures in their children's lives, they are more likely to be vulnerable to giving their child over to a predator if they're not aware of the predator. If they're and I wish I could present you with signs that would determine so that you can say what a predator looks like. Unfortunately, there are no concrete signs. There are no concrete. In some instances there really are. Uh, some instances there really are signs that you can see if the person is obviously pandering towards a child in a way that is very sexually aggressive, then you know that's a predator. That's one of the obvious. The other thing I know, when I was a kid, they used to, don't get in the car with strangers, stranger danger, all that stuff, and you know, it'd be something like, "Oh, want to pet my puppy?" And speaking of this, I have a dog, my little dude Jackson, and children love Jackson. They love Jackson. Jackson don't like children too much. He got to grow into children, but he don't mind them rubbing his belly. But he wants all my attention, and he doesn't mind when children give him attention, but he thinks sometimes the children want attention from me, and he starts trying to block them. Like, no, that's my daddy. But the children would just love to play with Jackson, and I know of stories where adults would use their pets as a means of getting children to in that position where they could abduct them, molest them, all kinds of stuff. And it's a very, very, it's horrible when adults do such a thing. It's horrible when adults do such a thing. But again, what I was saying is that when parents place themselves in that position of vulnerability because they want the best for their children, and I can understand those parents that interacted with R. Kelly wanted the best for their children. They believed that those opportunities were available because he was so accessible, it seemed like, and they ended up doing harm. And you can't fault parents. You can only fault the predator. You can only fault the one who does the exploiting. That's it. In any case where a vulnerable audience, a vulnerable person is exploited in any manner, you should not place blame on the victim. You should not victim blame or victim shame. That is not what should be doing. And I applaud all those persons who say, stop blaming the victim and defending the violator. And unfortunately, we have a habit here in the Black church where that happens, where a lot of violators get defended and the victims are shamed. And that should not be. That should not be. You should not always believe the victim. Sometimes that if the victim's story is sketchy, it's okay to question and interrogate until you find the root of the matter, and you can determine whether it was truthful or not, authentic or not, valid or not. And that's what should be done in every situation. Don't just take the word at face value. Investigate and find out. But in a lot of cases, there may not be any need to investigate beyond, if there's obvious sexual abuse, if you caught them in the act of sexual abuse, or if you find evidence, text messages, inboxing and inappropriate pictures, things of that nature sent from the predator, to the vulnerable party, then yes, that's incriminating. That's incriminating. If it's just a cry wolf situation, which unfortunately happens more times than we would care to admit, there are parties who know they are vulnerable in this day and age. There are children who know they are vulnerable parties and know that they can manipulate situations to do that. There are women who can do the same thing. There are men who do the same thing, and so we must be careful to differentiate and that all of that. Rosalind, the universal call to salvation does not require us to abandon attaining knowledge. Those who labor among you are absolutely right. We should know those who labor among us. One thing I admire about being in the AME church is that um, it is mandatory for every clergy person, even those who are licentiates in the church, they're just coming into ministry. Every clergy person, active and retired, must uh, participate in um, a clergy sexual misconduct uh, course, or course, class, whatever you want to call it. It's mandated, and we, especially those who are in active itinerant ministry, we don't receive appointments if we miss that. That's you can't get out of that. You don't get an appointment to a church. You don't get an appointment to a committee or anything like that if you miss that. We take it just that serious, and then of course that came out of a moment of reaction because we needed policies and procedures in place. In our book of discipline, we have a very lengthy policy regarding clergy sexual misconduct, how to report it, and all of that. We have a very lengthy process with which we must go through and understand and sign off that we understand and we have gone through this and we know what the policy and procedure is of African Methodist Episcopal Church when it comes to clergy sexual misconduct. But we also have in our book of discipline a section dictating how clergy should behave, listing the rules for pastors. This is what a pastor should be doing. And when I go and get my book of discipline, in my book of discipline here, and oops, in this book of discipline, it tells what we should be doing, and I go through with my students in the ministerial training. As the dean, this is one thing I want to make sure that they know this book backwards and forward, and I want to make sure that they know particularly the things regarding clergy. They should know. I want to make sure that they know, and they are practicing, so that they don't put themselves in any situation that would may cause them to have to be an R. Kelly, anything like that nature. So if again, we're live on Facebook and we're also live on Blog Talk Radio. If you want to get your thoughts on the air on Blog Talk Radio, call 347-237-5230 and we can get your comments on. If you make a comment online on Facebook, I may miss it. I may miss that. So that's the best way. It's not that I can't see it. Sometimes it's just not able to see it. So, but thank you all who are joining in. Thank you for all the comments, and I would love to hear your insight and dialogue on this topic. Now, let me address the secondary issue of predators and how we can prevent it. Not only must we be aware of persons who are predators, persons who are intentional in their efforts to exploit, manipulate, take advantage of vulnerable persons in faith communities and outside faith communities, in the church in particular, because that is within the reference that I am speaking of and I practice. We must be aware, and I touched on this, that there are victims and there are violators. And when it comes to the victims, we must understand that there's a trauma that is associated with that, whether it is sexual abuse, whether it is an emotional manipulation, whether it is whatever else it is that could be pertain to that. We must understand that there is a trauma that is associated with that can last throughout that individual's life, that will bleed over and carry over to how that person interacts with other individuals, particularly if it's an adult and a teenager. If a person is violated in their early years, we have empirical evidence to show that person will more than likely commit that same type of violation against another individual. Research has shown that. We know that to be factual, and in some cases, and perhaps even in the case of R. Kelly himself, when it comes to molestation or whatever it may be, if that happens in those young developmental years, the likelihood of the person that was committed upon committing the same atrocity highly increases. And that's something that uh, most most pastors are not aware of, a lot of families are not aware of, and so you have this cycle of violence against another. And I'm not talking about not necessarily physical violence, but an emotional violence, a mental violence, and in some cases, physical violence that would continue, and it can continue generationally. Some may call it a generational curse. I don't like using the term curse, and as much as I like a generation pattern of behavior, and to differentiate the curse, a spiritual thing, from a pattern of behavior that can be observed. And many of us can look back in our families and we can find patterns of behavior in our families that we know. We could probably trace back to a particular event in one individual's life, and it goes on also, it continues also over into the church. Um, if person who has been a violator violates someone in the church, either if they're the youth director, the minister, the minister, or whatever it may be, or just a member who has access to vulnerable parties, you know if they have been reproached in that manner, the likelihood of them repeating that manner, that increases greatly. And unfortunately, in most Black faith communities, most Black churches, we have no way of screening for that. We have no way of screening that. Now, we are required to have background checks at our local churches for any person that works with children. Anytime we go on our well, for our Christian education Congress, or anything that they church school, um, it is required that we report that. We don't report it to a Episcopal office, but I person, as a pastor, we have records of those persons. They provide to us the background check, and we are able then to determine if they are fit to participate in youth ministry, particularly as a chaperone to events that children will be present at. And it's a wonderful thing to have. I tell you that much. It's works. It works. It works, and it serves as a screener because again, you're able to sift. You're able to sift those persons, those parties that are intentional in being predators. Every system does not work, and I could give you a plethora of systems and anything. Uh, with if you're a pastor, it's very pertinent that you find one that works for your church, but it should include mandatory Black background checks for all persons working in ministry, whether they're working with youth or not working with youth. If they're going to be on the usher board, they're going to be president of the usher board. And especially if they're key persons in your ministry, they're key persons, if they're board chairmen, things of that nature, and especially associate ministers. If the person is going to be in your ministry in any capacity, particularly as a preacher, they need to have a federal background check. They need to have it. They need to have it checked and cleared. I'm getting a lot of messages on Messenger. So let me. My apologies. My apologies. My apologies. All right. So again, good morning. Hey, Olivia. Good morning. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Hey, I don't know if Shannon told you, but Olivia, yeah, I'll talk with you offline. Um, what was I? Lost my train of thought. I didn't take my Adderall this morning, so uh, so recognizing that there is a trauma that is associated with those events is another thing the church must do, faith communities must do, organizations outside of the church must do in regards to preventing, being proactive, being preventing, not reactionary. And in some cases, it may be reactionary, but when we are able to determine that both the violator and the violated both have been affected by some form of trauma, we're better able to minister to them in the collective ministry. We must be able to. It's time out for preachers just trying to get folk blessed and prosperous, and it's time for us to deal with real immediate needs of those who are in our care. There are people who are really hurting sitting in pews Sunday after Sunday, and they may get feel good messages for 1 week, but those messages aren't necessarily going to help them deal with the trauma that is associated with any type of violation that they may have had from their youth or even in their present. So we have to be able to craft messages from scripture. And believe me, there are enough scriptures in in that to deal with trauma. And when I think about particularly the issue of sexual exploitation, there are two scriptures that jump out at me, two stories in the scripture, both Old Testament, that jump out to me. The first one is the story of of is it Talia? I can't remember her name. Delia, not Delia. But anyway, is a daughter of Jacob, Reuben, and his brothers. Yeah, y'all help me out. I cannot think of this. But anyway, she she meets up with a man who, it depends on how you interpret the scripture, particularly the original Dinah. Thank you. See, I'm glad to have biblical scholars that I can, Rosalind, um, and so Dinah, her story is this: she has a male acquaintance, and they have relations of some kind, and depending again how you read the scripture, whether it was consensual or non-consensual. But either way, eventually he takes advantage of her. However that was, he takes advantage of her, and the news of it gets back to her family, and he then uh, says that, well, I want her now. He presents a dowry to the family, and her brothers, they big and bad. They're like, oh yeah, we accept the dowry. Yeah, we accept the dowry. And long story short, the brothers go on a killing spree because this person violated their sister. They go on a killing spree because he violated this. In their mind, he violated their sister. Whether it was consensual or not, even theologians are still debating that. But they felt that he had violated their sister, and they went off. And then, of course, the second story is the story of Tamar and her half brother, where he gets bad wisdom, bad advice from his friend Jehonadab. I think that's the name. Anyway, so he's heavily intoxicated and romantically in love with his sister, and it gets to the point that he is not able to fully function because it's overwhelming him, his desire. Uh, Thank you for the condolences. Thank you. It's overwhelming him, his desire to be with his sister. So he gets advice from his friend on how to get his sister. The friend says, oh, man, you know what? This is what y'all do. Y'all to fake sick. Get her to come and bring you some of her good food, her good soul food. And, when the time comes, when you're in that intimate space, just take her. Ammon lusted after his sister. I was trying to be nice. I was trying to wax poetic with my words. But he lusted after her. He craved it. He wanted to be with her sexually. And his friend gives him the means of how to get her sexually by taking advantage of her. So he takes advantage of her. He goes through his rules of being sick and invites her to his home. They are home alone. She is trusting in this person. Again, this is a primary example where you have a predator who is intentional, and you have someone who is being exploited. because this person came to serve Tamar came to serve her brother with no intention of ever having any type of physical relations with him. Yet he had intentions of having some type of physical relations with her, or at the very least expressing his undying and unfailing love for her. But in the end, he takes advantage of her. He rapes her, which causes, of course, his brother to react and kill him, and brings division upon the house of David. And that division lasted for generations until eventually the kingdom fell. And we're still seeing residual of that violation in uh, Israel today. We're seeing things of that nature. Um, so she was traumatized by that event. Her family, of course, both stories, the women were traumatized. In both stories, the women were violated, and in both stories, we saw very, very harsh revenge actions of revenge taken against those parties. Now, I would never advocate for vengeance. Scripture says, "Vengeance is mine," says the Lord. I would never advocate in any manner for that. Um, but what I would advocate is that we be more aware of how we can prevent. You know, in this case, in the case of the scriptures and the stories that I told from scriptures, both of those parties, those women, uh, unfortunately, were in vulnerable states that their brothers were not able to come to their aid. We are in an age now where we can be aware of people who are vulnerable parties in the church, as stated before, because we know the church is full of women. We know a lot of those women may be single or may be divorced or may have gone through heartbreak after heartbreak. And brothers will come in there knowing that. There'll be brothers who come in there knowing that those women are there and how vulnerable they are, and they'll take advantage of it. There are preachers who know they have vulnerable parties in their churches and will take advantage of that. The priests in the Roman Catholic Church knew that because they were seen as total authorities within their church, that they had full opportunity to use that to exploit their sexual desires and exploit those children, those boys, and some cases girls, and even some nuns. Anyway, I'm sorry. Yes, Rosalind, you're right. Rosalind, you're on the road. See, I tried to. I saw your message where you said you tried to call in, but it wouldn't let you. I don't know what's going on with that. But you're right. There was no help for the women, and in the cases, those biblical stories. And I hope that's not the case in our faith communities today and in organizations today. I would hope that I know there is help. There are plenty of organizations that can provide. If the church cannot do it on its own, there are plenty of organizations that can provide that for you. You can get the service. You can contract out that service to do it for you. And you want to be able to provide the best pastoral care that you can. You want to be able to say that we are, as a pastor, I am doing everything within my means to shepherd the flock of God. Jesus told Peter, "Do you love me?" Peter said yes, and he said, "Feed my sheep." You know the story. We want to feed our sheep, and we want to be able to say to those that we are shepherding or under shepherding that we are aware that some are vulnerable, some are exceptionally strong, some gonna be able to take care of themselves and don't want you to help them with nothing. In my opinion, that also makes them vulnerable. But we must be able to say that we are doing all that we can to create environments within our churches, within our faith organizations, within community organizations in the Black community, that we are doing all we can to be proactive in preventing predators. Will we be able to get them all out? No. We know plenty who get through the cracks, and again, some may have been practicing their craft of predatoring on children and vulnerable parties for decades. And there are some who may just be learning the game. They peep the game from someone else. And there are others who, because again, they experience that, and they are in turn unintentionally, and I use unintentionally lightly because, if they've been affected by that event in their life in their early development, the likelihood of them repeating it on someone else increases. We have to function out of love. Everything we must do must be done out of love, but we also must be doing so in the fear of God. Uh, when it comes down to accountability, and I take accountability very serious, personal accountability, where I am recognizing my own faults in my regular self evaluation, my daily self exploration. I am more aware of who I am, as an individual, and the likelihood of those uh, those characteristics that I wish not to come out sometimes come out. Um, as Paul says, the things that I don't want to do, I find myself doing. The things that I do want to do, I find myself not doing. Woe is me! But thanks be to God for Jesus the Christ, who is able and who does empower us to be better, to be the new creatures that we are. We are new creations, so we should function as such. Um, in my time, I'm able to be self aware, and I think again when we as pastors present ourselves transparently, uh, we're able more likely to infuse said transparency to our congregations and vulnerability to the Lord, not to each other. If I'm going to be vulnerable to my congregation, I must first be vulnerable to the Lord, and I must do so with my congregation, knowing that, hoping that they won't use it against me in the future. If they do, then they maybe I shouldn't have said that. Strike that. Stop. Rewind. Delete. Nah, just kidding. But we must be very aware of who we are as individuals and as a collective body, particularly as a collective body of the church. That everybody in the church got something. Everybody in the church has issue. Everybody in the church is struggling with something. Everybody in the church has experienced some form of trauma. It may not be the immediate trauma of sexual violations or anything like that, but they're still there. And the old folks say the church is a hospital. You come to be healed by the Lord, and you go out to serve and bring others to the Lord, so that they in turn can continue that process of bringing those to Christ who need to be brought to Christ. Those who are weak and heavy laden, come unto me, all you who are weary, weak and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. And that's what the church is for. We don't want to bring them in the place where they should be provided rest on their Sabbath, when they come on the Sabbath and the worship, if you're worshiping on the Sabbath day or if you're worshiping on the first day, if they're coming to that place, in this place where they are hoping to engage the Creator, engage God, and to worship Him in spirit and in truth and in the beauty of His holiness, they must first recognize that holiness is reflected to them, so that they too can be people who live victorious lives, the abundant life that Christ said in John 10:10. There is one who is seeking to kill, to steal, and to destroy. And a lot of times that person is not an evil spirit. That person is a human person. Cut me off. Oh, yeah, well, I've done my time. Um, I've done my time, so I'm running out of time. Got cut off on the Facebook Live broadcast, but we're still going on Zero today. But anyway, we only have about a minute and a half on this. And I lost my train of thought. So, but look, I want to encourage you, if you are listening online through Zero, I want to encourage you again to go and like all the pages, like Zero Today on Facebook, the Zero Network there. Follow me on all social media. Um, you can be a supporter of me on Patreon. You can be a patron there for low as $1, and you can go there with patreon.com/Lorenzo T. Neal and sign up to support me there. Whatever you're doing to support us, we appreciate it. We're going to do all we can to better serve this present age, our calling to fulfill. So with that said, we're going to go ahead and get out of here. Thank you for your support. And again, continue to lift our family in prayer as we get ready to celebrate the life of our beloved matriarch, Doris, but dear Jackson. Again, this is Pastor Lorenzo Neal. Until next week, I'm out. God bless you. God keep you.
Thank you for using Blog Talk Radio. Goodbye.